name is Lynn and I am studying to be a BCBA. In today's video, we're going to talk about Unit 5 in our class Intro to the Concepts and Principles of Behavior Analysis. So Unit 5 talks about the schedules of reinforcement. Now there are three main schedules of reinforcement that all the schedules fall under, and that is extinction, intermittent, and continuous. So continuous schedule of reinforcement means one-to-one. Every time you provide a response, I reinforce it with some sort of positive consequence, generally speaking, right? You say you want cookie, I give you cookie. You say you want cookie, I give you cookie. And that's a continuous one-to-one reinforcement. If it were to say one-to-two reinforcement, it would require, oh, you have to say, I want cookie. And then you'd say, oh, I want cookie please. Like you'd have to ask it twice kind of deal, and then I would give you that reinforcement. Intermittent reinforcement is basically just maintaining whatever behavior you have. Intermittent schedule is, I sometimes reinforce what you're doing, I sometimes don't. But you don't really know when it's going to be reinforced, so you just continuously do it. That's intermittent. Makes sense, right? You are intermittently reinforced. The other extreme one is extinction. That means no reinforcement whatsoever is going to occur. Usually we use these on behaviors that are non-preferred for us. So if a child kicks, screams, bites, cries unnecessarily, so to speak, during certain events, and we want to put something on extinction, that means that we're trying to reduce that behavior overall. So we provide no reinforcement so that behavior is no longer strengthened and no longer likely to occur. In this unit, we're also introduced to the four simple schedules. There's fixed, variable, interval, and ratio. For fixed, it means that whatever number that you assign to it, be it time or number of responses, it's fixed. So for every fifth word you write down, you receive a cookie. For every 10th high five you give, you get a hug or something like that. So it's fixed. And what I described just now were fixed ratios, where it's a number of responses. Variable means that there is an average amount. So if it's like variable 2, that means you can give me one high five and I'll give you a hug, or you can give me 4 high fives and then I'll give you a hug. It varies, but the average is 2, right? There's a combination of these items. There's fixed ratio, variable ratio, fixed interval, and variable interval. All that means essentially is fixed ratio is a set number of response. So for instance, continuous reinforcement is 1-for-1. That is a fixed ratio. For one response, you are given one consequence, right? For fixed interval, it's time-based. So every 5 minutes, something happens. Every 10 minutes, something will occur. Every 2 seconds, something will occur. So that's fixed. Variable, on the other hand, will always provide some sort of average. So about every 2 seconds, about every 5 minutes. Variable intervals, if it ever says interval, it's always describing a time frame. If it ever says ratio, it's always describing a number of something. So number of responses versus passage of time or intervals of time, right? So in a continuously graphed visual, the fixed interval and the fixed ratio responses will give a scalloped pattern and a stepped pattern respectively. For instance, in fixed interval, the scalloped pattern, basically what that means is there's no response, and then as soon as the time is about to occur, you see an increase of responding because they know that something's going to happen. And then again, it stops responding after that reinforcer is provided. So it does this on a graphed setting. Fixed ratio, I mean, there's a set number. So you do it, you get it. You do it, you get it, right? So it's pretty simple like that. Versus variable ratio or variable interval, the graph is constantly increasing, but at different rates. For a variable ratio, it's a very high instance of responding because you're not sure how many, but it's about, say, 5 responses. So you just do it as many times as possible. The rat will hit the lever multiple times and then it'll get the reinforcer and then goes, okay, got to do that again, try to get the average, and then he'll get it. So it's a constant stream of responding. For variable interval, since it's more time-based, it's low to moderate responding. So that's what you have to know about the 4 simple schedules of responding. There's also different types of schedules called compound schedules and the elements of compound schedules. Compound schedules are when 2 or more schedules of reinforcement are happening, essentially. So the first type is concurrent schedule, which basically means that you have the option to sit down and watch TV, you have the option to go to the kitchen and make yourself some food. Everything's happening all at once. You have the option to do anything. Imagine a ton of reinforcers or a ton of preferred stimuli are around you and you get to choose what you want to do. That is concurrent scheduling. The next one is multiple schedules. That one is more akin to a stoplight. So a multiple schedule, you go up to an intersection where there's a stoplight and there's a green light, so you know you can go. It's signaled, right? So one schedule is signaled, and then it turns yellow and then it goes red. Well, that's another schedule where you have to stop. So you visually see what's available and you respond in effect. Just imagine street light has different settings, right? So like you do something different at green as you do as red. That's a multiple schedule. The next one is a mixed schedule, and that one's a lot harder. Imagine if that street light broke. Well, now everyone has to treat it like a four-way stop one, right? But I'm not sure if you're from California or not, but in California, people go crazy. Like no one knows what to do. The rules are there, but no one knows how to follow them. So you'll get people who are like kind of crossing, but also not sure. So it's a mixed schedule, meaning that there are some rules, but you don't know when they're available. There is a schedule going on, but you're not quite sure. You're not given any signals as to which one is actually supposed to happen. The next schedule is called a change schedule, and this one's pretty simple in my opinion. It basically means you have to do one thing in order to get to another thing, in order to get to another thing, and then you're able to get the last reinforcer. Basically saying, for instance, washing your hands would be on a change schedule, right? So you would, well, that's a change behavior realistically, but you still require one step in order to get to the next step. The end of one step is the SD to the next step, and an SD is the discriminative stimulus, or basically the stimuli that would be in the environment that would either cause a behavior to occur or reinforce a behavior. They're kind of used interchangeably, which is a little annoying, but given the context, an SD is almost always the antecedent. In later chapters, it will be also of reinforcement. After that is the tandem schedule. Now, the tandem schedule is just like the chain schedule, except you can't tell when one step ends and the other occurs. The best way I remember it is a tandem bike. You don't know when the first bike ends and the first bike begins. So you can't quite identify where it is because there's no signals given. So just remember that in mixed and in tandem schedules, there are no signals that are provided to tell you how to continue on, versus multiple and chained schedules. You are given signals to show either what schedule's on or what steps you need to take or what next steps are available for you. This unit also discusses matching law, which I thought was really interesting, and behavioral contrast. Matching law means that we will always give the same amount of effort towards the amount of reinforcement that we receive. So what they found is in a Skinner box, or an operant chamber, they let a pigeon have two buttons. If they tapped one button 5 times, they would get a pellet. And if they chose another button 20 times, they would get a pellet as well. So what would this pigeon do? Well, it would definitely go after the one that only required 5 hits more often, right? But every now and again, it would still go to the 20 press button and engage that one until it got its reward. It would do so at a less rate, but it would still engage it. So basically, its effort matched the requirements of what was available. So if it's easier to get, we're gonna do it more often. It doesn't mean we're gonna stop going after the ones that are harder to get. It just means we're gonna do it less often. So that's matching law. The second item was behavioral inverse. That one I always think is really cool because basically all it's saying is you're gonna see, it's an inverse relationship between two different settings, essentially. So if you are able to get a kid to sit down and attend homework for 10 minutes and it's slowly increasing and they're doing a really good job, suddenly you're also going to see, most likely I should say, right, because there's no absolutes, but there's a good chance you're going to see him start tantruming more and more during mealtime, or more and more during school time or playtime, because he's doing really well somewhere, so he's going to start dropping it off somewhere else. It's a very common occurrence. It's not guaranteed, but it does tend to explain a lot of behaviors. Whenever we see behavioral inverse, or contrast, there's a very specific point where you can tell, oh, they're increasing here, and there's a very good chance you're going to see a decrease somewhere else. So that's behavioral contrast. It's a very interesting idea, but there's a lot of recorded proof of it occurring very frequently. There are 2 other schedules that are talked about but are kind of not really put together with the rest of the schedules just because they are kind of random, at least as far as I could tell. One of them is alternative schedules, which means you have the option of 2 schedules and you may choose to fulfill the conditions of one of them and receive the enforcement, or the other, right? And it's two schedules that are essentially running at the same time, but it's not like concurrent. Concurrent is you get to choose whatever you want, versus there's still a set rule, so to speak, or a set role that you have to do in order, or conditions you have to satisfy in alternate schedule. And then the other one is conjunctive schedule, which means both schedules that are available have to be satisfied in order for you to receive your reinforcement. So they go hand in hand, where they're very similar to each other, where one, you can choose one or the other, and that's alternate scheduling. And then in conjunctive, you must do both. You must fulfill both in order to receive your reinforcement. The last bit in this chapter, or in this unit, because it was a long unit, was differential reinforcement. Now, differential reinforcement is kind of self-explanatory. It explains itself in the name, where you are reinforcing different responses. So differential reinforcement of something. The first one we learn is DRH, and that one is differential reinforcement of high response, which basically means that their response has to be equal or higher to a certain number that's set. So there will be a condition that's set, and they have to reach that condition or higher to receive their reinforcement. The other one is DRL, which is differential reinforcement of lower rates, which is the opposite. There is a set number, and their responses have to hit that response amount or lower in order for them to receive their response rate. The other one is a DRD, which is differential reinforcement of diminishing rates, and that's just when they expand the amount of time in between each reinforcement. It's essentially a progressive DRL. So usually with DRL, you're putting it on something that you don't want the kid to do. So the kid keeps scratching themselves 10 times every 10 minutes. Well, with the DRL, if they scratch themselves only 5 times in 10 minutes, then they get the reinforcement, right? And the next time you're going to do it, it's going to be 2 times every 10 minutes. So it's diminishing, right? You're slowly progressing the amount of time between each response, so that diminishes it. So you're reinforcing the diminishing rate. The last one is a DRP, which whenever I see it, I always think it's derpy. But a DRP is a differential reinforcement of pace responding. So that is when you are reinforced based on a certain amount of time between each response. The best way I can describe it is if a kid knows how to brush their teeth, you don't want them doing that 5 times a day, right? You want them to pace it. You want them to, if they're going to change their clothes, they're only going to do that 2 or 3 times a day if needed, right? So you're pacing it, so you aren't going to reinforce them if they run and change their clothes 3 times in a minute. And you're just well, you don't provide any reinforcement. So they're going to be okay, this isn't getting what I want anymore. So slowly over time, you can pace it, and when they actually do the correct response at the correct times, which is in the morning, at night, right? Generally, that's when people change their clothes. Then they're reinforced at those times. So it's pacing them. The last schedules that I'll touch base on that are covered in this chapter, but I won't go too far into just because they get very technical, is in the schedules of reinforcement, there's also lag scheduling, there is ratio strain, and there's also progressive ratio. So that's basically the effect between if you're adding time between reinforcement or you're decreasing time between reinforcement. So it's just little intervals and changing and manipulating the intervals to try and produce a different response towards the environment. That was a lot. Unit 5 covers a lot of really strong technical items. So I hope they weren't too confusing. I hope some of the examples were understandable. And if I get anything wrong, please leave a message or a comment, because I'm sure that I made a mistake somewhere along the lines. But yeah, I will see you in the next video.